Okay, once again, guys, we want to just plug the socials one more time. We have our Instagram. Mina's been working on some Instagram Reels for us recently, YouTube Shorts as well. Very nice. If you don't have enough time to tune into the whole episode, Mina puts the Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts that captures like the really important and like good messages from the whole episode. So if you just want to like see like little bits and pieces, definitely go check those out. We set up the SoundCloud and the Spotify as well. The Spotify, I won't lie, I think we have like 0 plays on Spotify, if we're being honest. But, some people tune into the SoundCloud, but just remember, if you guys don't use SoundCloud, we have Spotify as well. And you might notice during this episode, we are missing a very important member of the podcast, George Solomon. George Solomon has a really important exam coming up, so he couldn't join us today. Everyone just keep him in your prayers, and yeah, we hope you guys enjoy our conversation with Abu Benjamin.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, please, as Mina mentioned in the podcast earlier, we use these questions to ask whoever we have on the podcast. So if you have any questions, please use the Google form, use Instagram DMs, just, relay your questions. Don't be scared, right? It's for us and it's for you guys.
Yep.
Anything else?
Also, we're thinking about posting the topic of the podcast early on. Mm-hmm. So then you guys have time to submit your questions to the forum. So if you would like that to happen, then just let us know.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, just keep all of that in mind, and we hope you guys enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Scarlet Sermons. My name is Anthony.
My name is Mina.
My name is Mark.
And today we're joined with a very important guest that needs no introduction. If you want to introduce yourself.
Everybody, my name is Father Benjamin. I'm the youngest and the newest, well, maybe not the youngest, but definitely the newest priest at St. Mary's Coptic Church in East Brunswick.
Thank you so much, Abuna, for joining us today.
Sure.
And the topic that we're going to talk about today is time management. Mina, if you want to open the book, just spit out some questions and we'll have Abuna get straight to it.
Yeah, one of the topics that were requested a lot through of you guys was time management. And knowing Abu Benjamin, and he'll go more about his life soon. But he went through medical school and now he's a priest. So obviously he focused on a lot of his spiritual life, and going through med school, the long process, and also focusing on the rest of your life is not an easy thing. So we'll go more into the aspects of the tools and how you can deal with the distractions. So, Abu Benjamin, would like to give a bio by yourself?
Sure, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm old. You're right, I went to Rutgers undergrad, actually, and from Rutgers undergrad went to medical school here in New Brunswick at Robert Wood Johnson, which is now called Rutgers Medical School. Always been a congregant of St. Mary's, and then eventually a servant of St. Mary's. It was to go back to what you were saying a few moments ago, it was a challenge. You really have to learn to kind of hone your skills of time management when you want to serve and also be in a career like medicine. Now, of course, a lot of careers have time challenges, so it's not the only career, but the point is, it takes effort. It's not something that comes easily. You have to really make a way and make a system for yourself and say, I'm going to have to manage my time efficiently, because either one of those two things, your education or your service or your spiritual life, or both, will suffer if you're not. Yeah. And then, of course, after medical school, I worked as a physician for almost 30 years, and different stages of my career required more time, dedication to the career. Obviously, during my residency and so forth, it was challenging. So there are ups and downs, but you never lose sight of the fact that you have to set a schedule for yourself, set a system for yourself. I've spoken to several people in my few months here as a priest and talked about, in our spiritual lives, we have to have consistency. And in order to get that consistency, you have to find a system that works for you. And the same applies when it comes to our education, when it comes to our career, and so on and so forth. Now, when you put the two together, it becomes even more of a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then last year, I was ordained a priest, and everything changed.
Thank God.
So how would you say, how was the transition in your life from being a physician and all of this medical stuff? How would your time management kind of shift from being a physician to being a priest? How did you go with that?
Honestly, I think time management is something that you learn and you fine-tune as you go. I learned certain time management skills in my education, And then when let's say in my undergrad, and then when I went to medical school, the workload was a lot harder. But whatever skills and tools I learned in undergrad, I learned to apply them to medical school. And I had to make some changes because there was more information, it was more studying, it was more demanding. But at least I had some basic tools that I had established as an undergrad. And the same applies from, let's say, from medical school to residency. Whatever I had learned from college, I applied to medical school. I carried over, and then whatever I learned in medical school, which included the stuff that came from college, I applied that to my residency. And then from my residency to my life, to my career, and from my career, believe it or not, even to the priesthood. I have a lot of things that I do to this day in my day-to-day schedule, my weekly schedule, my service schedule, liturgies, confessions, retreats, and so forth, that I find myself going back to a lot of the stuff that I learned even way back in college. It's enhanced, it's a little bit more involved now, but it's the same basic idea. So it's not something that you kind of have a new system. I think if your mind is set, if your mindset is to be most efficient with your time and to use it properly, it'll be something that you'll use, but it'll just grow and enhance, and you'll tweak it as you go along. Mm-hmm. And of course, the same applies to your spiritual life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think now that we have a schedule and we have a system, right? How do we take those and how do we deal with distractions, right? So if we said we're going to have a system, we're going to wake up every morning, we're going to do our prayers, we're going to do some homework, be active, go outside. But then we get a phone call and we're like, oh, I have to go run and do this quickly. Oh, I have to go help on my friend. Oh, I have to do, the world is crazy. We always have distractions every single day. So how do we keep consistent with our schedule but deal with the distractions that come to us every single day?
If you're going to take it specifically from the side of the spiritual life and time management in spiritual life, comes with its own set of challenges. Because yes, there are distractions in our secular lives. There are distractions while we're studying. There are distractions when we're taking exams or preparing for exams or whatever. But of course, we have unseen forces when it comes to the spiritual life. Things that we never would have expected. We're fighting a spiritual war, as St. Paul says. And those distractions can come in any form. It could be a phone call. Could even be an illness, like one day, you wake up sick, and now you're not able to study for 2-3 days. How did that happen? Or not able to pray and do your Agbeya and do so forth for a couple of days. The key, I think, to the spiritual life and your time management is to understand, and let's take this back a little bit now, maybe even biblically. What is time? What is time? Time did not exist before the creation. God created time. He created the day and the night. So even before the creation, the biblical account of the creation, there was no such thing as time. It was a gift that God gave Adam and Eve and ultimately all of mankind. And then fast forward several thousand years to the New Testament, when our Lord gave the parable of the talents. And he said, I gave this one X number of talents, what did you do with it? And I gave this one X number of talents, what did you do with it? And so on and so forth. Talents, of course, is not necessarily that you can play the violin or that you're a wonderful soccer player or something like that, or have a great voice and you can sing alhan. Talent is a gift. God gave us certain gifts, and of those gifts is time. Now, how do I handle that time? How do I handle that gift? That's where it becomes a little different than the secular world. Because in the secular world, had you not put in the work, you wouldn't have done well on the SATs. And had you not done well on the SATs, maybe you wouldn't have gotten into college. Of course, God's involvement was there, but a lot of it depended on you, your focus, your commitment, your dedication to get from step A to step B to step 3. But when it comes to time, we didn't do anything to get time. God gave us that time. No matter how much I want, there will never be more than 24 hours in a day. It's whatever God established it to be. So he gave me those hours, those years, those months, those weeks, those hours, those minutes, even those seconds as a gift. And if I look at it from the perspective of that parable, what do I do with that gift? Now it becomes a responsibility. Yeah. It's not just time management so I can be efficient and be more productive and the outcome will be better, although it can be in my spiritual life. But now it's just a responsibility. How much of that responsibility that God gave me do I now consider as a talent? And the idea of the parable of the talents is basically, I gave you a gift, hold on to that gift, Because there's going to come a time when I'm going to ask you, what did you do with that gift? What's the interest? What's the return on the investment? I don't like to use the financial analogy, but just to make it simple, God gave you a gift and said, when I come back, I want to see that gift doubled, tripled, whatever it may be, or even 10% more. Whatever it is, God is going to expect that back from us. If I give you a talent and you did nothing with it, then you didn't take the responsibility seriously. You didn't make something of it for yourself. So in our spiritual time management, the question is, this is a gift God has given us. He's given us 24 hours of the day. Realizing, of course, that throughout the course of the day, and certain times of the year more than others, there will be a lot of other responsibilities that would be cutting away at those 24 hours. You know, it's not like we're all sitting in a monastery and have 24 hours. And even those of you that have been to a monastery, you know monks are not sitting and praying 24/7. I mean, their inner prayer life may be constant, but they have responsibilities in the monastery. Let alone those of us who are outside, who are in school, who are studying for exams, who are applying for graduate programs, who are working, who are serving, etc., etc. All of a sudden, the 24 hours becomes, chopped and chopped and chopped. And how much of it is left now for your own spiritual life, your own spiritual development, and your own spiritual growth? So that becomes the challenge. How do I manage that, and how do I make the best of it, so that at the end of the day, and say, 24 hours came and went, and I didn't have one conversation with God. I didn't have one moment of God. So to answer your question broadly, the perspective has to be different. Time management in the secular world is about results. Time management in the spiritual realm is, this is a gift, and what am I doing with that gift? Yes, there will be results, which is my growth in my spiritual life and my stronger relationship with God. But if we look at it from the perspective of a responsibility, that gives us a lot more, like we approach it in the way that it's supposed to be approached, that this is a gift God gave me, and to handle and to use that time efficiently. I hope that answers the question. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it's important to differentiate time management when it comes to the academic and secular world versus time management from the spiritual world.
Yeah, and everything you said reminds me how valuable our time is on Earth, and how like you can't really waste a single second. So I know I find myself sometimes I'm just sitting in my room just literally doing nothing for hours and hours. So like just thinking about that point of how you have to use kind of every second like to the best of your ability, in what ways would you say, how can you get up from that slump and just kind of get active and make points in your mind to say, oh, I'm going to change how I spend my time, or I'm going to change my schedule around? Like, how would you go about just making a change in your life in terms of your time?
Well, to go back to something we said earlier, it takes commitment, right? But let's say you're in a slump. Let's say you're in a slump and you need to start over, or you've lost track of that commitment, you've forgotten what that commitment is. Sometimes, the outcome of that complacency is what wakes us up. In academic world, you get complacent with your studies, you fail an exam. That's a big wake-up call. Like, oh my God, my GPA is going to collapse. Now I got to really work hard. Do we get that in our spiritual lives? And we do. We just have to be alert and looking for it. You're not going to have exams like you would in school, where all of a sudden, you failed a semester, or you failed an exam in a certain class, or your GPA is falling apart. But God sends us messages throughout the day, throughout our lives. It could be something like St. Anthony, when he just heard a verse being read, or a gospel being read in church, and one particular verse caught his attention, and that was the wake-up call that he needed to hear, that got him to say, you know what, I'm going to leave this whole world behind and go. And there's countless stories in our church history. St. Moses the Strong, St. Mary of Egypt, all the saints of repentance, most of them had a certain point where there's something that clicked. God sent them a message, either through somebody else, or through an illness, or through a passage in a Bible, through a service, or whatever it may be, that got them to wake up. Regardless of how it comes, the key, or I think the one thing they all have in common, is that they realize how much time they've wasted, and how much little time is left. You've all heard of Abuna Justus Antoni?
Yeah.
Okay. What was one of his famous things that he used to say in his latter days?
What time is it?
What time is it? He kept asking, what time is it? What time is it? What time? Why do you think he was asking that question? It was stubborn. I don't know. Yeah, there's many guesses as to why he was saying that, but it just shows you his concern with how much time he had left on this earth.
Yeah.
He wanted either to get to God or was asking, how much time do I have left to repent? And either way, it's a focus on time when it relates to his spiritual life. Because no matter how long we live on this earth, it's going to come to an end. Do I use that time efficiently? And when I fail an exam or something I fail at in my secular world, the results immediately wake me up. It's a little pinch that wakes me up. And God sends us those messages on a constant basis. And then we ask ourselves, how much time? And by reading the stories of the saints, by reading the Siniksar, and even just by reading, even the Gospel of the Bible, you'll have multiple stories that'll bring to your attention how these characters, how these personalities in the Bible were very, very aware of their limited time. And St. Paul says, or St. James, I think, says that life on earth is a vapor. You ever go out on a cold winter day and go, whew, it's gone. In the grand scheme of eternity, our life is nothing. So every second does count. Every second does count. And as long as you think about it from that perspective and always remind yourself that time is short and I only have 24 hours in a day, and be consistent about it, I think that's the best way to do it. I'll tell you on a personal note, when it came to my studying, one thing you probably don't know about me, and maybe you do know, I'm a big hockey fan. I love ice hockey. I grew up in Canada for a few years before we came to the States, so I'm a big ice hockey fan, not the Rangers, not the Devils. Don't say those don't say those team names in front of me. But I used to love to watch hockey.
Yeah.
So even when I was in college, whenever there was a hockey game that was televised, I'd want to watch it, or in medical school. And I remember my mom saying to me, don't you have to study? Yeah, after this game is over, after this game. And my mom would always say to me, in Arabic, but I'll just translate it for you in English, the hour or the minute that you waste today is never going to come back again. Mm-hmm. So take advantage. Don't put off till tomorrow what you can do today, basically is what she was saying. She goes, I'm glad you're enjoying your hockey game, but those 2.5 or 3 hours of that hockey game, those 3 hours are never going to come back again. So use those 3 hours towards something that's constructive, not something that's ultimately not going to help you too much. And the same thing applies to our spiritual lives.
So I think one of the experiences I had with issues of time management was for all of us. I think last year during Holy Week, we had our finals during that specific week. It was the first time we've ever had like a serious, I wouldn't say distraction, but like something to do. So how would we, especially during like how intense like spiritually like Holy Week is, how would you like study and like let's say studying is like holding you back from going to services because like you have to study for your exams, how would you not feel that guilt or like that like I don't know, like it's your fault that you're not going to Holy Week even though it's because of studying?
Well, you didn't schedule the exams. So I understand the question regarding the guilt, but just remind yourself that you're not the one that scheduled the exams. You want to go, you want to participate in the Bescha. And if you're efficient in your studying, when you know the exam, most exams are announced at a certain point. The teacher or the professor is going to say there's going to be an exam on this day or midterms are scheduled for this week. Then it becomes a responsibility on you to make sure that you've prepared ahead of time so that when the day comes or the week comes for the exam, you may not have to cram as much as you thought. I still have to study, I still have to review, but it's not like I'm going to cram 24/7. I just have to review this chapter because I've been studying all along. That's one thing. Second thing is, the church gives us these beautiful services and gives us the Bescha week and gives us the Bescha prayers and Holy Thursday and Good Friday and all these beautiful rites and traditions and rituals and so forth for us to participate in. If you ever feel a sense of guilt or you feel a sense of, if I go there, then at least I've done what I have to do, ask yourself, am I doing it, or what purpose am I doing it for? Just so my conscience is clear that I went to Bescha? Or are you really going there to benefit? Because honestly, you can benefit from it even if you're not there physically. You can listen to it in the car. I remember many, many years where my exams and my on-call schedule or whatever it was conflicted with Bescha, and I couldn't attend there regularly. So between classes, I would listen to it in the car. We didn't have streaming in those days, but whatever device I had it recorded, and I would listen to the Bescha. So I was living the Bescha in my heart, in my mind, even though physically I wasn't there. Many, many, many people who initially came from Egypt, Coptic people who came to America or immigrated outside of Egypt in the early 70s, late 60s, and so forth, and my family certainly was one of them. We came at a time when there were very few churches around. When we first moved from Egypt, as I mentioned a few moments ago, we went to Canada for a few years. At that time when we came, there were 3 churches in all of North America. There was one in Toronto, there was one in, actually 4. One in Toronto, one in Montreal, one in Jersey City, and one in California, in Los Angeles. The closest one to our house was 3.5 hours away. So even on a regular non-Bescha week, just the annual, for us to make it to liturgy every week was very, very hard. So we would go 1 week on, 1 week off. It was outside of our control. But my parents made it a point to make sure that recordings of the liturgy, again, there was no streaming at that time, recordings of the liturgy were playing on Sunday morning in our house, and that the Bible was open. And at least we knew that this was the Lord's day. We treated it as such, even though we couldn't physically make it to the church, we were still benefiting from it. And the same thing applies to here. Feeling guilty about it, that the exam is scheduled, you didn't schedule. Feeling guilty that you didn't go and check off in your checkbook or in your things to do, your to-do list that you went, well, that's the wrong purpose. The purpose is to live the suffering and the passion of Christ. The church is a nice environment to do that, because we're doing it as a community, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it outside. Mm-hmm. And if you approach it from that perspective, you'll benefit with or without your physical presence in the church. Of course, if you can make it, you make it, but if you can't, sometimes it's out of your control.
So I know you mentioned that your family, obviously, they raised you at, a really good Christian life. You said you had liturgy playing. They instilled in you the very Christian values and the morals that are essential. So what do you do if you weren't raised in that circumstance, or your parents really didn't care that you went to liturgy, they never read the Bible together, they didn't pray together, there was no Agbeya being read? How do you go from not having that in your childhood, especially that's your development, that's when you really learn all the core values. You go from not having that at all to then all of a sudden coming to church and trying to, now you're a baby, right? Now you're trying to restart all that, but it's hard when you're an adult and you're trying to do all that. So what are some steps, or what are some advice you'd have for people who are like that, who didn't have those values?
While the values may not have been there, there's something that this generation has that my generation didn't have, is access to a lot of things that we didn't have recordings, we didn't have SoundCloud, we didn't have any of these things that you guys had, that your generation has now. So even if you didn't have Masalan, the environment in your home growing up, now you have almost unlimited resources at your disposal, so you can absorb a lot more in a shorter period of time than maybe we did or didn't have when we were growing up. But I think once the commitment is made that I'm going to use my time, even though I was not raised in in a home that was not very, very Christian, or at least the focus wasn't heavily on God or on the Christian life, once you become aware of it, once you decide I'm going to change that in my life, then the commitment part comes in. Look at St. Moses the Black, the Strong, right? He was much older. He became a father to hundreds of other monks. Many of those may have been older than him biologically, but he made so much progress in such a short period of time because of his commitment. Yeah. So it's a good question, but we have the resources. Mm-hmm. And anybody who wants to make up for lost time, so to speak, if you are committed about it and you ask God to help you, He will help you. He will carry you through, and He'll give you more than 24 hours in a day, figuratively speaking, of course. He'll make the time so blessed that in the time that you're trying to absorb what you think you should have done, He'll make that time. Look at the thief on the cross, right?
Yeah.
Last second. He didn't learn anything. He didn't learn anything other than proclaiming his faith. So your question is a good question, but the question has to be geared towards what am I trying to achieve in that period of time? Is it just memorizing the books of the Bible? Is it learning all the rites and the traditions? Is it learning all the hymns because everybody else knows them and at this point I don't know them? If that is just where it ends, then that's not really worth it. But if you're doing it for the purposes of a stronger relationship with God and a deeper relationship with the church and the mother, our mother, and with God, then God will help you carry through. It depends what your motivation for doing that is.
And that's such a great point, Abuna, of just the resources, because like now, like the internet and all of the resources we have are so vast, like everything's at your fingertips. Like anything you want to search online, like I guess like through the appropriate resources, like you'll find it in a split second.
Yeah.
And trying to link that back to time management, like it definitely saves you a lot of time, just having everything just like kind of right in front of you and surrounding yourself with people who also have these resources. Like, for example, if I want to find a sermon, I can turn to Mina or Mark, be like, oh, like this is a good sermon. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. Like everything is just there. So if you like, in terms of time management, like you just have all these things there. You can just insert them into your schedule, like whenever you like.
I remember when I was in college, and I was here, I was a college youth here at St. Mary's many, many moons ago. A group of us decided we wanted to do some research on the liturgy, the structure of the liturgy, the history of the liturgy, and so on and so forth. Now, this is before the internet. There was a time, believe it or not, when there was no internet. So we started doing some research in a public library, and somebody told us that one of the largest collections of books about the liturgy and the history of the Coptic liturgy is in the library, the public library in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Public Library. So we had to get together, get into a couple of cars, and drive all the way to Brooklyn to find these books, many of which we were not allowed to take out of the library. We had to make photocopies of those pages and then bring them home and read them. Every single one of those books now is digitized and is available as a PDF online. So you don't have to leave your room to even find them. But you're absolutely right. The resources that are available now have made it so that whatever time you would have dedicated to X matter or Y matter or Z matter or whatever it is, now it takes so much less, giving you a lot more flexibility now to put that time towards the important things like your spiritual life. So it is a gift. Keep reminding yourself about that comparison between the world, the secular time, and the spiritual time. It's a responsibility, but it is a gift that God has given us.
Another question that came up, Una. How can you break down like larger tasks or a big goal that you have into like small like steps, and how do you manage that over a period of time?
Part of the answer to that question goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, by starting small. The tools that I learned to manage my time in high school, I applied them to college, from college to my graduate training, from graduate training to my career. It doesn't mean that I forgot how to do the small steps. So when I have a big project that came up, let's say in my career or even in my service in church, I go back to the days when the projects were small, when I was in high school, and say, how do I do it? Okay, I'm going to break this into what needs to be done urgently versus what needs to be done less urgently. One of the things, of course, that I learned in my career, specifically being in the medical field, was learning how to triage. Triage means you put something in the order of priority. The patient who is much, much sicker gets the attention. The person who is not as sick has to wait a little bit until you stabilize the sick patient. So you have to learn to prioritize. Not only prioritize, the responsibility, which is your spiritual life, over other things, let's say, but even within your spiritual life or even within your academic life, you have to say, what is more urgent? I have an exam tomorrow, I have an exam next month, 2 different classes. Well, obviously tomorrow's exam is going to get the priority because you need to study for the exam tomorrow. You have a month to study for the other exam. I'm behind in my studies in this one. This one I'm caught up on. Okay, then you're going to go to the one that you're behind on rather than the one that you're caught up on. I'm doing well in this class, I'm not doing well in this class. You follow what I'm saying? You have to prioritize based on the need of the situation, especially when you have 2 things that are possibly conflicting with each other. But if you take one big project and have to break it up, it depends on a couple of factors. One, are you doing this project by yourself, or are you doing it with a team? One of the nice things of having a team, especially maybe in your career or in your education. Say, okay, we're going to break this up so that we don't each get overwhelmed. You take the first 20, and I'll take the next 20. So now you've split it up. But if you don't have anybody, what do? You have a massive project and you don't know where to start. One of the things I like to do is I make an outline. I don't know if they still teach you this at school, but it was mandatory when I was in high school and even in college. When we were writing a term paper, the professor or the teacher wanted to see an outline before our first page of that term paper. Why? Because it helped us, and the outline, they didn't grade, they just wanted us to get into the habit of breaking down and saying, I'm going to take this amount of information, that's going to be chapter 1 or page 1. This information is going to be on page 2, this information is going to be on page 3, and then I'm going to have my bibliography at the end. So now I've already structured my plan before I even wrote the first page. So having that outline in your mind of how you're going to tackle a specific project or a specific endeavor will help tremendously. Just even in an app, on your notes in your phone, or on a piece of paper, or on a sticky note, or something like that, what you're going to do and how you're going to break up this project. Because once you have that, then your mind now is geared towards, I'm going to do this, and I'm not going to do this until this is done. And then I'm going to do step 2, but I'm not going to do step 3 or 4 until number 2 is done, and so on and so forth. So having an outline of how you're going to tackle goes a long way. It goes back to your simple term paper. Again, I don't know if they do that anymore, but that was something that was mandatory for us. And I've learned that doing that even in my spiritual life helps a lot. Because now you're tackling the project into small subsets, not one just big global thing that becomes very, very overwhelming for you. When you're overwhelmed, or when you don't have that outline, you can become overwhelmed, and then you become less efficient in your studying, in your reading, in your spiritual life, and so forth. So,
Thank you, Win.
you're welcome.
Yeah, we just want to thank you, Buna, for your time with us. I learned a lot. Pretty sure everyone else learned a lot. And
Pleasure.
We really enjoyed having you with us.
My pleasure. Just remember the most important thing, if you take nothing else from this, is that time is a gift that God gave us. It's also a responsibility. And that applies to our secular life, but a lot more so to our spiritual life.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Again, thank you so much, Buna.
pleasure.
It's been Anthony,
Mina.
Mark.
and of course, Buna Benjamin. And we're so happy that you guys could have watched with us. And thank you guys so much.